I just wasn't able to find a career and make money in sound
Mm,
design. So I ended up going back to my parents, and then I lived with them for a while. And then they encouraged me to pursue other aspects, and mainly production really caught my eye because within like the indie field, there were so many great ideas that just didn't come to light because of poor management.
mm,
I don't want to knock them, but like maybe it's because of inexperience, maybe
mm.
because of ego, but I felt I could do better.
Welcome, everyone, to a new episode of the Zero to Play podcast. I'm your host, Carla Duke, and today I'm joined by Todd Enyeart. Todd has experience working across multiple departments in games, such as being a QA lead, producer, and has also worked as a sound designer on the side. Today, we're going to talk about some QA and production best practices, how Todd got into the industry, what he has learned in his journey so far, and more. So sit back, relax, and enjoy episode 11 of season 3 of the Zero to Play podcast. All right, welcome Todd to the show. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Carl.
This is actually perfect timing because New Zealand has just gone into a lockdown, and we've been working kind of in the studio for for the last few months since April was the last lockdown, and that was only for a week or two. So like working remotely and that kind of conversation hasn't really been top of mind, but all of a sudden now, I think those questions and thoughts are coming back to me, and I feel like a lot of the world are still dealing with these these new times, and so the first question I wanted to ask was, with your experience in QA, what are some best practices that you've kind of adopted to making the kind of QA process and workflow be as efficient as possible while working with a remote team?
Well, the best thing is the best practice is always communication.
Mm-hmm.
Before work from home, we were using a product called Teams.
Mm,
And so we just continued using that. That became the main focus. So instead of me going to like a person's desk and asking questions, I just pull them into a chat one by one, just like, hey, I see this happening. How can I help? Or did you have any questions, or what's going on?
Yeah, no, communication I think is definitely the most important and just kind of ongoing thing as teams change and grow. At Rocketworks we use Slack and Discord a lot. Do you feel like there's anything that is impossible, or that you have found that you can't match to the kind of relationship that you can build in person? Like, are there any things that you do miss about working in person?
Sure, it's face to face that I miss the most.
Mm,
I mean, sure, there are webcams, but with my team, some of them did not have great internet, so there's
yeah,
always be lagging. Like I couldn't tell their facial expressions till it was too late.
yeah, yeah.
That's really how I related to a lot of people on my team. Is like I checked out their body language. Like if they were stressed out, I could see that, and I like temper my response or criticism to them.
Yeah, no, I understand that as well, especially as a someone in the production department. You're constantly checking in with your team on a daily basis during stand-ups and things, and a lot of the team don't have webcams, but I feel like at least if I have a webcam, I'm able to express myself in a way that they can probably connect more. So even though I can't potentially connect with them as good as I want to, they could hopefully connect with my body language and kind of personality a bit more to make them feel a bit more comfortable. But yeah, in terms of QA, is there anything in particular with um, like tasking that you found really helpful, in terms of like just like the daily build process that you found to be interesting or valuable with your kind of your routine?
Well, when we did go into the work from home situation, my workload actually decreased quite a bit
Yeah.
because there is a lot of like, oh, how are we going to do this? Because we had equipment that we used back in the office, and all
Yeah.
that was locked down because it's all proprietary.
Hmm.
So they had to figure out a way to like get it out to us. and make that as smooth as possible. So once we were able to do that, it was pretty much close to normal as we could get it.
Mm.
So the best thing that I learned is just, like I said, just communicate. And when we did have any equipment issues, just be on top of that as fast as possible, especially because we had to have things shipped out to us and they had to go into the office. We had to schedule that time. So there were some things that we had to take into consideration, but like once everything got sorted out, it became smooth.
Yeah, it's funny. If I'm being completely honest, I know that your current position, you're under NDA and you can't share too much about it. And I think I'm trying to tiptoe around that in the right way. But I'd love to just
Thank you.
like for any, is there anything you can say about your current position that could just help me understand a bit more what what your kind of day-to-day looks like?
Sure. There was actually a huge to do, like once the Xbox Series X and S launched. It's like, what can we say, what we can't say? The official verbiage that I can use is I was a part of the TestX team working with Microsoft on the Series X and Series X console.
Cool. Yeah, nice. And I guess one question I have about that is what is it like? Like, how does it feel to be part of a project that is so kind of under wraps? Do you enjoy it? Do you find it frustrating?
I was actually used to NDAs, but I know a lot of my testers were not, because this is their first testing job that they ever had. So they had a little bit of trouble. Like I caught them outside the office telling them, oh, hey, I'm doing this to them, to their friends. Like, no, you can't say that. I mean, it's okay that you say it in my presence because I can temper and take like any action needed to like squash anything. But if you go outside, I have heard of people like getting just let go
Yeah.
on the next day because someone heard that they were talking about it, and it's just unfortunate.
Wow. Yeah, I can imagine that, especially with a social world that we're living in. I've noticed, I've had a few experiences as well, even in private channels. You might think you are speaking to a private audience and it's something that can be kept under wraps. That all it takes is one person within that private group that knows someone else that they'll share that information with, and then it can easily come back to you. Do you have any other advice for people working under NDA to not share any information that could be harmful?
Sure. It kind of depends on where you're at in your career, because
Mm,
I'm pretty far into my career. I'm not like guru level yet, but like I've had some experience, so I find that I can be vague and just say, "Oh,
mm,
on a project I had,
mm.
this is what happened," and you don't know what project it is. It could
Yeah,
be my current project. It could be one that I did in the past.
yeah, yeah,
But just be careful on who you name and
yeah.
when you go about answering questions.
Totally. One question I would love to ask, and I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on this, but when it comes to QA, one problem that I've faced on like a development team is the documentation process, especially nowadays with things constantly changing, working in like in an agile world where games are being developed as a service and constantly updated. What are your thoughts on documentation best practices coming from the QA department?
Documentation is always important. I know it's not realistic on a lot of teams, but there should be someone that's just dedicated to making sure that any documentation that you have is up to date. We used Microsoft program OneNote.
Mm-hmm.
So it would have been nice on a couple of my projects if we actually had someone that was dedicated to updating it, just
Mm-hmm.
like in the morning or in the afternoon, just so that way the large teams that we had, it was like well over 100 people. So
Mm.
we could all be on the same page. But realistically, like if you're under a tight deadline, that may not be possible, but
Yeah.
it would be nice.
Yeah, because I think what documents do well is communication is obviously extremely important, and communicating one to one or communicating within your team, but then communicating on a project wide level. Documentation, I think, does a good job sometimes of doing that communication for you. And yeah, like I think it's the maintenance of documents that are hard. Creating the document after a meeting is always easy. It's easy because then you share that one piece of information, but then once a conversation happens a few weeks down the line that you need to update like one line in that document, and then how to communicate those little changes and little conversations on an ongoing basis. I feel like that's the real challenge. Do you have any processes to help I don't know, catch that, or find out when changes are being made that you think are useful?
I do. As a team leader on a lot of the projects, I had my own specific OneNote that I just kept up to
Mm,
date to make sure it's like, oh, I heard this or I
mm,
heard that. So that way I can relay that to my team saying, okay, this is what I've heard. This is how we're going to do it. Is there any like things that you guys have heard? Because like
mm,
different people have different interpretations of things. So as soon as I can figure out, it's like, hey, what's the common ground? We can move forward.
mm,
And like you're saying, it is super important. I found it even more important when you were training new people
mm,
because like we'd point them to the documentation. Hey, you need to do it this way. Naturally they'd have some questions, but if it's not up to date, then they'd be
mm,
doing the wrong thing. And we'd be wondering, like, why aren't you up to speed yet?
mm,
Take the time, looks like, oh, you are looking at the wrong thing. That was old information. And then we have to apologize to them and put in a request to get it updated, and maybe it would get updated and things would run smoothly, but a lot of times it didn't.
yeah. Yeah, no, it seems to be definitely an always ongoing process. Documents always need to be updated and things like that. One feeling I have when it comes to game development or just games in general is how overwhelming it can feel to be building a game, or going through the process of trying to make something work like in the game space. Do you connect with that feeling of overwhelmingness? And do you have any advice for how to not get overwhelmed when it comes to all the things that need to be, happening and stable?
I do. I feel like my time as a producer has uh, helped me understand this question a lot more because as a producer, you're more in line with more of like the back end stuff, more the business.
Mm,
And there are times when I wonder, how do games get made?
yeah.
Because as a producer you try to find roadblocks. It's like, okay, I can foresee this happening and then this would happen. How do I mitigate this? So the
Mm,
best practice I'd have is always this. It sounds negative, but it's kind of hard to kind of balance yourself to being that pessimistic to being optimistic. But you always want to, like, in the back of your mind, always look at, hey, what can go wrong?
mm,
But when you present it to your team, always be optimistic. Say
mm,
like, okay, there could be a chance that this could happen. Here's what we're going to do. Because I find that if you have at least some sort of roadmap
mm,
to fix a problem, your team's going to be more confident and they feel more comfortable coming towards you saying, I can see where you're coming from, but maybe if we do this and then we can have that discussion, it's like, okay, like maybe I know something that they didn't as a producer, or maybe they know something different like a programmer would, because
mm.
programming is my weakest. So they would know something that I wouldn't, and then we can move forward like, oh, this is going to be a better solution for everyone.
Yeah, that's a really, really good way to put it. Having like balancing the pessimism with the optimism, and kind of being a leader. And when you communicate that to the rest of your team, not kind of bringing everyone down, but just being realistic. And I think, yeah, having a roadmap and being able to see forecast what the state of things is going to look like in a month's time is great, because starting to have those conversations a month in advance just means you get to solve the problems a month before they happen. And that's definitely, yeah, I think a good process. When you worked as a producer, was there anything else that you really enjoyed about the job, and that you think about when you think of your experience as a producer, that you miss it all?
I miss finding those answers to the questions in Roblox.
Yeah.
I find that's actually one of my greater strengths is just communicating with people like, hey, how do you feel about this?
Hmm.
Because in my experience, it's not actually like telling people what to do, it's asking the right questions.
Mm,
So that way they can start thinking about it. And like if I need to guide them more, I can. But I always like a team that's self-sufficient. I always
hmm,
go towards that, try to move them towards that. But sometimes that's not possible. They
hmm,
need coaching, and that's when I need to step up.
hmm.
But for the most part, I need to let them do their thing because they're experts on their discipline.
Yeah.
I know a little bit, so I can communicate to them, but I got to let them do their thing when the time comes.
Yeah, I like that. Learning how to ask the right questions rather than telling people what to do. That's, I think, a really a really good way to put it. Do you have any ambitions for what you'd like to do in the future? Any kind of jobs or experiences that you wouldn't mind having throughout your career?
Most of my experience has been on more the development side.
Mm-hmm.
I have been looking into publisher positions.
Mm.
I've applied to some, gotten interviews. It really hasn't come together yet, but that's kind of where I want to go because it interests me a lot. Like, how do you guys work on the publishing side? I know a lot on the development side, but a lot of the publishers' work is still a mystery to me, and I'd love to learn more about it.
Yeah, cool. I agree. Publishers, I think, bring a lot of value, and different publishers have different like skills and benefits.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, that is. I don't want to. I don't want to ask too many questions, but what is it about, like, what are a few things about publishing that you think are really valuable to a development team? Like, if someone was looking for publishing, what can you see as some of the benefits of getting a publisher on board?
Getting a publisher on board is, well, besides the finance, because that's
Mm,
one of the biggest reasons why you do go to a publisher, is also their network.
mm,
Because in one of my previous jobs, uh, actually, I can't talk about this. This is when my time was with DesignWorks. We were working on casino games, and we're working with the publisher, and so we were able to leverage not only their finances but their expertise in the gaming or casino game industry. So
mm,
if we had any questions about like what's legal in one
yeah,
state here in the United States compared to what's legal in, say, Germany,
yeah.
they were able to answer that for us pretty quickly, as opposed to us just trying to find the answers and blindly guessing.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, actually. A publisher that's specialized in like a certain niche or genre of games can be incredibly valuable because, not all publishers are going to retain that information for the legalities behind casino games in the world in different states and regions. That is a really interesting point. I what are some of your favorite publishers in the world, that you think are providing the most value to other games?
Right now, I believe Raw Fury is hands down one of the better publishers out there, simply because they, let's say, they released, I'm sure what it was, they released their documentations of like how their process works.
Hmm.
So it's open to everyone, so everyone knows what's going to happen.
Hmm.
I find that, there are some benefits to being secretive, but if it involves like a process of how you're getting your game out, I think it should be more out in the open so that way you can better prepare for what the publisher needs. Because Raw Fury has its own discipline of games that it specializes in, as opposed to EA, who does like pretty much everything, mainly like sports games. So
Hmm.
just really would make it better for everyone if they knew it's like, oh, this is what I should expect.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I haven't heard of Raw Fury before, but I do like the idea of being open about their processes and the kind of projects that they would want to take on board. So that's awesome. And I do feel like there's more publishers, like smaller niche publishers, popping up in different areas that might specialize in a certain genre of games. So it is a cool time, I think, in games. If you can find the right publisher, like partnership, it could be, yeah, that could help you a ton to be successful. In today's supporter segment, I'd like to bring attention to Logitech Gaming, and Blue Microphones. Thanks to them, they sent me a product bundle that has just elevated the content of this podcast and show. As you can see, the video quality is incredible now. They sent me a Logitech Stream Cam. For audio, they sent a Blue Yeti microphone. I already had one, but now I have two, which will enable me to do in-person interviews and other things like that. And also they provided this Logitech Gaming Pro X headset to have as just a great pair of headphones to use for the podcast, but honestly, I'm going to use it for my own personal work and games as well. So really appreciative of them. Go check them out on their website, logitech.com. bluemicrophones.com, and I think Logitech G or Logitech Gaming. You can find them on social media, and yeah, I'm just really grateful for them, and please support their products. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how your journey into games started. Like, what what was the first trigger that made you consider pursuing a career in games?
It was actually my parents. They were pushing me to go to college. And so here in the United States, we do have a couple of different colleges that specialize in games.
Hmm.
I ended up going to a college called Expression out in California. They do audio,
Hmm.
and they had just partnered with GANG, that stands for Game Audio Network Guild.
Hmm.
And so they were like in partners with them. So I went out there, took their courses, and tried to get into sound design. And it's a tough field to get into because at the time, a lot of people took advantage of like, oh, you want to work in games. Oh, you can do this for exposure.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Yeah.
fell into that trap, unfortunately, and just wasn't really able to make it.
Okay, so that was pursuing games from like the sound department, and I can imagine, yeah, because sound is usually something that you get contracted to do. Sound is probably, there's probably a lot of projects where there's an indie developer, or maybe a couple people, but sound is so out of their wheelhouse of skills that they'd probably bring on someone to help them with sound. What advice do you have for those people pursuing sound that have maybe just graduated? What advice would you give for them to go to have like a more stable path into the industry?
Sure. First one is definitely don't be afraid to network. Like,
Mm,
if I know a lot of the conferences are super expensive nowadays, but if you can find a local group just to hang out with, pitch ideas to, that's going to help a lot because
mm,
you never know when they're going to make it and they can come back to you saying, hey, I need sound. I know this one guy.
mm-hmm,
And then they reach out to you, and hopefully it's going to be a paying gig. If not, then that leads to my second point is that, if it's not something up front, work towards something on the back end because there's
mm-hmm.
always it sounds kind of weird, but there's always a way to make money,
Yeah, yeah,
either on the front end or the back end. And I know with sound specifically in music, you can always get royalties for it.
yeah.
And with sound design, like you can always say like, hey, with this sound effect that I'm making for you, you can have it exclusive for so many months. And
Mm-hmm,
after that, I'm going to sell it on like the Unity store or package
mm,
it up and sell it through another website.
mm,
So that way other people can buy it and I can make
mm.
money.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'd love to talk a bit more about that. So using things like the Unity Asset Store and um, Unreal as well. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that that's enough of an area to be successful from like the sound designer perspective? Do you think that there's enough of a community, enough of an audience there to make something, or is it still kind of like a side hustle space?
And from what I understand, I would definitely consider it more of a side hustle. I
Mm,
wouldn't try to make it your main
mm,
source of income simply because there are so many people nowadays that are using the asset store, submitting to it,
mm,
that you're fighting like a whole horde of people have that are in the sound design, for
mm,
example, field. So, I mean, unless you're able to like network and as well as like promote yourself successfully,
mhm.
you're going to have a very difficult time like
Yeah.
making a living that way.
Yeah, that's fair. It's like a lot of other industries as well, I think. And just what the internet has made available. These kind of like asset stores where you can license or download music for your projects. Yeah, I think, yeah, side hustle is probably like a good way to define it. Why did you get into sound design? What was it that intrigued you about sound in games?
I actually took piano when I was younger and I loved music.
Hmm.
And like I remember the old Disney, like how they made it, like the old black and white cartoons. I remember watching that as a child as well. So I thought, like, oh, I really like this and I'm passionate about it. So I'm going to use that focus and take that into games because they were just starting out with like FMV videos at that time. So it's like that was super cool. It's like, oh, this is like a movie. You're using realistic sounds as opposed to chip tunes.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was like, that got me excited. So that's what drove my passion to that.
Cool. And then what happened? What was the next kind of chapter once you pursued sound design? Like, what was your next stable job, or was it still in sound, or did you get a job in a different department?
I actually got a different job because I just wasn't able to find a career and make money in sound
Mm,
design. So I ended up going back to my parents, and then I lived with them for a while, and then they encouraged me to pursue other aspects, and mainly production really caught my eye because within like the indie field, there were so many great ideas that just didn't come to light because of poor management.
mm,
I don't want to knock them, but like maybe it's because of inexperience, maybe
mm,
because of ego, but I felt I could do better. So I
mhm,
went out and I went to a school called University of Advanced Technology where they had a program called Game Development and Production.
hmm.
So I graduated from there and met some people there, and they were able to like uh, put me on the right path of production, at least until I was laid off from my producer job.
Yeah, yeah. Nice. Yeah, that's really cool. And did you feel like your perspective of production from studying and from kind of being told about the skills, did they change at all once you got your job there, or did it kind of continue to grow, and did your passion continue to grow as well?
They definitely did change because there's a there's a big difference between academic principles and what happens in real life.
Yeah,
Case in point is, I'm not sure, are you familiar with Scrum?
yeah, yeah.
So yeah, in school we were always taught like, oh, this is the method for Scrum, this is how you do it. But in the real world, people like to take bits and pieces of good ideas
Yeah.
and meld them together. So what was supposed to be like, oh, this is how you're supposed to do it 100% of the time became more, it's like, it's more of a suggestion and a guideline
Yeah, yeah.
to getting your product out to the world.
Yeah, I feel like there's something psychological when it comes to adopting methodologies where people like to put a spin on it, or change it up, change the wording or the process to make it feel more like an idea that they came up with in order to feel motivated to kind of enact it. But I think you're right. When everyone adopts a different version of a methodology, it becomes really hard to, I don't know, have the proven successes that you read about when you read about Scrum and Agile, and seeing that adopted in a slightly different way. Do you have, I guess, from because you studied it as well and you've worked in the industry, do you have, like, if you were to walk into a studio today to implement like a new type of Scrum or Agile, what would you kind of lean on as your favorite methodology just to get things moving and um being productive? Is there any kind of like basic methodology that you'd like to mention?
Well, a part of Scrum is always like the daily stand up.
Mm,
I know a lot of people don't like meetings, but I find in my experience that if you treated it as just something as a get together, so that way people can bounce ideas off of and be cognitive of the time, because
mhm,
that's what I found that I liked about it is when I ran meetings, I could be like, okay, I understand what you're doing, but let's sidebar this for a moment so that way
mhm,
we can get everyone in, and that
mhm,
way everyone has a turn, everyone has a chance to speak up to what their problems is, what
mhm,
roadblocks and what solutions they may have.
mhm,
So I would definitely lean on that primarily, and then go from there for the other Scrum uh, elements like the backlog and that sort of stuff. Try
mm,
to if the team doesn't know about the backlog, introduce it to them slowly, explain to them, hey, here's the benefits of like, you're doing this, but we don't have time to finish a task. We can
mhm,
put in the backlog so that way during the next sprint,
mhm,
we can pick that back up and you can work on it and develop more to what you feel is going to be appropriate for the game.
mhm. Yeah, totally. That's good point. Have you explored different methodologies at different companies or jobs?
I haven't. It's mainly been Scrum or some sort of iteration of Scrum.
Yeah.
So
Have you worked with Scrum Masters that like their job is entirely to help with the processes, or has that always been kind of on the shoulders of the production department?
in my experience, it's always been on the shoulders of the production department. I haven't really worked with a Scrum Master yet. It would
Mm,
be nice to because I'd love to be able to pick their brains. Like, hey, how do you feel about this, and
mm,
what does Scrum say about like our current situation? Because that's what I find like with games. Like there are times when Scrum works, and there are times when Scrum kind of like butts head with what we're trying to do. And so
Yeah.
to find that answer is what I would love to pick a Scrum Master's brain about.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some online that would be happy to be DM'd and reached out to. But that is a good question, because I think the word Scrum Master, because there's courses and certificates you can get to be a certified Scrum Master, that gives them a level of trust that I think the title of a producer is harder, because a producer encompasses so many different elements of game development, whereas a Scrum Master is quite specific. Um, yeah, an area that I kind of ask you about is your perspective on just games as a whole. Now that you've been in the industry for a while, do you still feel like games are a powerful medium? Do you look forward to what the future of games might look like?
I do. I think they are a great medium for storytelling. And in the future, like there's a lot of work to be done with VR. It's not in its infancy, but there are still some like missteps that it's having. And I can't wait for it to like actually find its stride, and like the equipment becomes more available, more or less expensive. So it's
Mm,
more accessible to people. I
mhm,
think that's really where the bottleneck is. There's great equipment, but it's out of reach for a lot of people because of an expense.
mm. Do you have a VR headset?
I do not. Like I said, it's a little bit out of my budget, but like as
Yeah.
soon as I'm able to find one that's within my price range and that I like, I'll
Yeah.
sure to pick it up.
Totally. Yeah, I'm kind of waiting. There's a project being developed in Auckland called Wanderer, which
Hmm.
is a VR game, and what I like about that project is that it feels more like an adventure inside a VR game rather than an action,
Okay.
and it just seems like a different angle, just kind of seeing what VR could do, exploring a different genre. And that's one that I'm excited to see, just because I feel like it's creating a different experience with a VR headset than what I'm used to seeing. I guess it's kind of like Half-Life Alyx. I haven't played that either, but it seems like it's quite an adventure and story driven VR title as well. Um, yeah, are you playing any games at the moment that you kind of feel like are just really good?
It's at the moment I really don't have too much time to play video games, but I do find myself going to the new Tony Hawk game because I grew up with Tony Hawk on the original PlayStation, and I think they did a wonderful job of recreating it. Like
Yeah,
it really feels like playing it back when I was younger. Like
awesome.
the music that they did and how the combos work, it felt natural. It felt like riding a bike to me because the controllers felt the same, and it took a little while to get back into it, but once I was able to pull off all the tricks that I loved doing as a kid.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really cool. I haven't checked it out yet, but I did play Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 quite a bit when I was growing up. Um, yeah, and I guess from a tech, well, you mentioned VR. Do you see any other areas of games that are kind of being developed that you're interested in, like seeing how they are, whether it's like AR or like the future of consoles and PC games? Do you see that as like an exciting part that's being developed?
I do. I think on the console side, with what Microsoft's doing, it's becoming more accessible to have like a lot of power for a gamer to have like graphics, sound.
Mm,
So that's always exciting that like, hey, like for a time, like the console can compete with PC. I'm sure in a few months time though, or maybe a year or so, PC will go back to being the king of being like ultra graphics and everything else. But for the moment, the consoles are pretty almost on par with a lot of the tech now.
mhm,
Uh, One other thing I have looked into and I'm very interested in is using games as a teaching tool.
mhm,
I can't remember the company's name, but they're creating a kind of a gamification of surgery.
hmm,
So that way, someone that doesn't have any surgical experience can go in, experience it through VR, like
mhm.
what they need to do, sewing up, making the cuts, and that sort of things that you probably don't want to do on someone that's living if you haven't had a chance to learn about it yet.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, technology definitely feels at a stage where you can educate, putting things from a textbook into a games, into the medium of games, and with the kind of graphics and ability that we have to just make things, it's not Minecraft quality anymore. It's quite like realistic. Like I feel like you can be immersed and learn at the same time with the kind of projects that are being developed. So yeah, that is an exciting part. I think there'll be a lot more game developers that aren't necessarily traditional game developers coming up, that they're working in a specific industry on a game like experience for a certain industry, like hospitality, or there's a construction VR company that is doing some really cool stuff for training. And I definitely see that as a part of the future. I really appreciate the conversation. It's felt really natural. I loved picking your brain on some of the like best practices for working with a team, especially remotely, and just kind of the importance of communication. That's definitely important, and something that now that I'm working from home again, will try and make sure it's adopted properly, because it's easy to kind of fall when you're working from home to just kind of forget about everyone's individual I guess tasking, but yeah, like importance of stand-ups and things like that. So yeah, if anyone that's listening is interested in following Todd and in his journey, and even though he's under NDA, I'm sure he'd love to hear from you
Absolutely.
and share his value. You can find him on Twitter at Void Swimmer. And yeah, I loved hearing about your journey, because going from sound into production and QA and where you're working now, I think is, there's so many different paths that people are taking, and there's no one path. You can jump around different departments, and still be kind of successful and have a career. So it was really cool hearing about that. Is there any last kind of words that you'd like to say to the audience listening, or any other area that you'd like to point them towards if they want to see more about your journey?
Yeah, going off of what you're saying, I found that in my game dev journey is taking those bits and pieces of what I have done and trying to find where they apply into. For example, I used a lot of my production experience to be a team lead in QA. I found like there was a lot of crossover, and I was able to uh, better facilitate my team that way because I had that experience, as opposed to someone that was just fresh off, just moving up through QA.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. No, you're right. Sometimes jumping around can, maybe there's a sound QA lead role in the future that will combine all of your experiences and work. And yeah, you're right. Combining different skills from different roles can be really, really beneficial in your favor. So yeah, no, thanks for sharing that, and giving me your time over the last hour to chat. And I hope you have a good rest of your day. And yeah, see you on Twitter. That's, I think, where we interact the most at. So yeah, thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Carl. Stay safe because of all the issues.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Zero to Play podcast. I hope you learned something about game development, the games industry as a whole, or the future of games. You can follow us on Twitter at Zero to Play, subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Spotify, or any other podcasting service. Other than that, you can find links to this episode down in the description below, and I'll see you guys next week for the next episode.